Okay, I'm gonna do a live stream. Not entirely sure why, but I'm gonna do another live stream. But it's a blank void. Alright, let's see if we can't get this live stream to Big Bang into life. Boom! And wow, a fully formed universe that fast. That joke's gotten old, but whatever. Whatever. Here to start it. I don't know what I'm doing. Well, I kind of know what I'm doing. Somewhere I have a camera, and I recorded a video earlier, and the space is filled up on it. So I decided to be lazy, and yeah, I'm gonna live stream. Yeah. It became kind of like a running gag. Once again, I started off this live stream with a little game of peekaboo. Yeah, there we go. Peekaboo. Yeah, there we go. Disappear and reappear. Blank void, and boom. All of a sudden the video exists. Yeah, it's getting old. But hey, I got a coffin crisp. Yeah. Halloween themed chocolate bars in December. Because that's when you know life is really good. When you're getting your Halloween themed chocolate bars still into December. You know. I got some space to myself at the moment. Nice, quiet. Television's not on. Nobody's watching television. I don't think anybody's gonna call. The phone's not gonna. Or will it? It probably will. But maybe not. I don't know. Nobody's coming in the driveway. No, nobody. No, nothing. Nothing required of me. Live stream time. Yeah. Yeah, and I was having a little bit of this aloe vera beverage, which hasn't killed me yet. So I figured I'd talk about the Commodore 64 Mini, even though I'm going to record a proper video talking about it. But, you know, first impressions, I got the place to myself. Nobody's using the big high-definition television. Most of my video game televisions, or televisions I've set aside for video games, most of mine are cathode ray tube ones, because I kind of prefer that for video games, but the high-definition television is not in use, so I suppose I could be spending this time playing with the Commodore 64 Mini. And it's not in here, and can you see it? Is it such low resolution due to my connection speed that it doesn't show up? Is it backwards? Because sometimes, almost at random, this broadcasts backwards onto the internet? I don't know. I'll find out when I watch this later. But no, the Commodore 64 Mini. Also, I thought it was just kind of interesting, and I think I rambled on about it before in some other live stream at some point. People have been making a lot of a big deal about the new She-Ra cartoon, and if you listen to what they're saying about it, then you actually watch it, you'll learn they're arguing about nothing. It would almost look like a bunch of people who never saw the cartoon have begun arguing over it, and they're arguing about nothing. And by those people, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with criticizing the art. You know, if you don't like the animation style, that's fine. That's a legitimate criticism. But I mean, like the social issues, whether they're too much, too little, too far, whatever. It's like, no, you're arguing about nothing. And yeah. So that's all there is to it, you know. There's the Commodore 64 Mini. Is it good? Yeah, it actually is a pretty cool little device. And the whole argument about She-Ra, a bunch of people arguing about nothing at all. So, you know, that's all there is for me to talk about. See you later. No. Anyway, the Commodore 64 Mini, well, it has 64 classic retro games included, and because they are historic computer games, it's cool to see them, it's cool to have them there, but to me, all I really care about on this, ultimately, the ones that actually matter to me, is Jumpman and Jumpman 2. And would those two games be worth me getting this in and of themselves? Yeah, it's fucking Jumpman for the Commodore 64. Yeah, it's such a simple game, but it was so bloody fucking awesome. I mean, can't not love Jumpman. It's Jumpman. Not Mario Jumpman Mario, but Jumpman. You know, Jumpman. Jumpman 2 is basically the same as Jumpman Junior, which is on the ColecoVision, and you can also get a Commodore 64 Mini that's an older device. It's battery operated that you plug into a television, and that had it as well. And Jumpman 1, you know, it's just fun games. That said, when you're playing with one of those old joystick controllers, it's awkward and it sucks. I plugged a USB Sega Saturn style controller into the Commodore 64 Mini. That was awesome. Playing Jumpman with that was pretty cool. But the Commodore 64 Mini, and I haven't tried this yet. I got a USB device that I'm going to set up later. You take a USB device, you set up a file. I think you have to have the folder with a specific name. The original version of the C64 Mini that launched in Europe, I believe, would only let you have one game in the folder that it would access as their way to minimize piracy, but they determined, yeah, that was kind of silly. I mean, these games are so incredibly old, and people just keep switching the files around in that folder anyway, and, you know, they apparently, I haven't tried it yet, but this one here, because I haven't spent very much time playing it with it yet, which I want to do more with. Apparently, you can load like a whole folder full of Commodore 64 games. You can go in, load up one of those games. So basically, the entire library of Commodore 64 games that has ever existed. If you have a way to access that file, you can apparently play it on the C64 Mini, and supposedly, as far as I know, it plays everything perfectly. So if I want to play the real Ghostbusters, which was a pretty cool game on the old Amiga computer system, which never came to any of the consoles, but did have a somewhat scaled down version on the Commodore 64, I can play that now. I want to play Frantic Freddy? Of course I want to play Frantic Freddy. Everybody should be fucking well playing Frantic Freddy. The only thing wrong with Frantic Freddy is it quickly gets way too hard. But play Frantic Freddy on it if you have it. If you have the file and you load it on a USB device, plug that thing into it. So that's awesome. I can't really comment on the quality of playing those games, but so far everything I've done with it, it seemed like it plays the games with good quality. And the biggest weakness is it's stupid joystick thing. Yeah. But I tried plugging in, like I said, a Sega Saturn style RetroLink USB controller. And that was great. The only problem with it is, with all the buttons, you can't really remap them to do the functions that the joystick that comes with the system does. So you'll end up leaving the original joystick plugged in, and then you plug that in. You can also plug a USB keyboard into the device, which I haven't tried yet, but it only has 2 USB ports. But from what I've seen online, if I plug in, I have one, but I just haven't really tried it yet. If you plug in like one of those multi-port adapters that allows you to plug multiple USB devices into the same device, that'll work. I believe the only problem you might have is if the devices you plug in end up to be too power draining, too power consuming to work with the C64 Mini. But, of course, many of those adapters, such as one I have, you can actually plug an actual cord into it to provide it with additional power so that you'll have enough power to run multiple USB devices from it. So there's that. So this is basically, a console version of the Commodore 64, and you can plug keyboards into it, all sorts of controllers. It uses USB, which is convenient for, nowadays. So, yeah, it's a pretty awesome little device. I really like it. When that was announced, that was more exciting to me than when I heard about the Nintendo Entertainment System Mini. The Nintendo Entertainment System played a big role in getting me interested in video games, or keeping me interested in video games, but ultimately it was the Commodore 64 that really got me interested in video games. And I kind of started with my home video game experience with a ColecoVision with adapter to play Atari 2600 games. But the Nintendo Entertainment System games tended to have more involved storylines and just more involved. So, of course, the Nintendo Entertainment System, as a home video game console, was one of the key things that got me started into video games. and I have a lot of nostalgia for it. Not nearly as much as, like the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo, which I like far more than the Nintendo Entertainment System. And when I look back on it, even though it's kind of a little more forgotten, I mean, Atari and Coleco were pretty special to me too. But the Commodore 64 was something I always wanted. I always wanted a computer long before I ever had one. Back in the 1980s, there was Commodore 64 computers in my elementary school, and playing Ghostbusters on the Commodore 64 computers, and Zaxxon. Zaxxon is awesome. Had a pretty close version of Zaxxon on the ColecoVision. Those years, decades later, before I actually got my hands on a copy of Zaxxon for the ColecoVision. But yeah, Zaxxon on the Commodore 64 was awesome. Miner 2049er, that was pretty damn cool. Well, it was fun anyway. A lot of great stuff. In fact, just earlier I was playing on my cell phone. I had my cell phone playing music from YouTube. The theme to Turrican, even though way back in the day I didn't play Turrican. But years later I played it on the Amiga, and then I ended up getting console versions for Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo, and even the European Nintendo Entertainment System version of Turrican. Like, that was like playing the Commodore 64 music from Turrican, which is a rip-off of the Transformers music, or movie music. It was, if you listen to the theme of the Commodore 64 version of Turrican, you can tell that it's like a 8-bit recreation of part of the soundtrack from Transformers the movie from back in the 1980s. The good Transformers movie. And it's that music that takes place after most of the original toy line had just been killed by the Decepticons, and the shuttle's like coming to Autobot City on Earth that the Decepticons have, invaded. And the battle just starts up, and they're like transforming Autobot City into a battle fortress, and yeah, that was pretty fucking kick-ass. I mean, that movie was awesome. I recommend it to anybody. You put it up next to the Michael Bay crap, and it's like it had story. It had like this panicked, rushed feel to it, but it's not like it was a rush to make the movie. It felt like the characters were dealing with urgency. So there was a lot of stuff that just happened, but in the context of the movie, kind of made sense because you didn't have time to wonder, what are these weird aliens? Why is there this offshoot of the Transformers on this weird junked up planet? Because there's not time to explain it. And it just feels natural, like a weird rampage through the universe, dealing with bad stuff. It was just a fucking awesome movie. And as action movies go, it's just plain old action movies go. That was awesome. I mean, it was a really decent adventure story. And it's like, I just thought it was kind of entertaining that when they made music for Turrican on the Commodore 64, whoever did that, they ripped off music from that soundtrack, and that's an awesome soundtrack. And but yeah, just an excuse to ramble on about Transformers for a moment. It's like, that's what a kid's movie should be like. I saw it as a teenager, so I don't have like this childhood nostalgia for it. As a kid, I was like, I watched the Transformers cartoon, and I don't remember a lot about it. I remember the plot lines from season 3 were the ones that I really held on to as being interesting. But the characters from seasons 1 and 2, I remembered a little bit more, especially season 1. But I remembered some of the new characters from season 3. Because season 3 is where the storytelling got really good. The overall premise was pretty cool, but they kind of fell into this trap that a lot of cartoons back in the time period did. It's like, we have this awesome concept. We're going to write it like this interesting action story. But, people are starting to complain that this stuff's a little too violent and a little too disturbing and scary, and we're going to tone it down. I mean, there's one episode in season 2 of Transformers where I'm pretty sure the Decepticons are drunk on Energon and rolling around like a cats on catnip, after whatever it was they had done. And then in fly some Autobots going to sabotage Megatron or whatever. And it's like the Decepticons are rolling around on the ground or passed out drunk or some stupid thing like that. I'm not joking about that either. That's basically what they were, except it was Energon. It wasn't booze, but they and it's like, all right, they've been in this horrible war for literally billions of years. Maybe this is the time they can take out some of the hid Decepticons before they lose a few more Autobots. It's like, no, they just continue on and they do their little stunt that they're going to depower Megatron. But they could have wiped out like half the Decepticons while they're like lying there, half dead or drunk or whatever the hell was wrong with them. And it's like, they wouldn't do that because it's a kid's cartoon. But it's like, there's no point in them fighting unless there's, drama and, it's like you don't fight over the person that accidentally spilled your ice cream, knocked over your ice cream, somebody bumps into you, you drop your ice cream cone. You don't fight over that. That's stupid, And the message in cartoons was their epic battles was about sweet fuck all, It was like, they toned it down. They made things weak. Well, the third season of Transformers actually became legitimate science fiction in a cartoon form, and I liked that. But I remember it's like, they started talking about the death of Optimus Prime and some other characters in season 3. And I didn't know about the movie. I was like, when did that happen? When does that episode air? I'm pretty sure it wasn't in the previous season. I wanted to see that. I was interested in that. Optimus Prime had been my favorite character, but at the same time, it's like, that's interesting. They upped the stakes. Something serious happened. And it's like, I never knew what happened until years later. So I don't have like childhood nostalgia for this. I might have some teenage nostalgia for this because as a teenager I found like Transformers the movie, and that was pretty fucking kick ass when I saw it. And yeah, and they killed. I mean, that was awesome when they killed off like all those Autobots at the start. There's the first toy line. Kill them off. It's like, okay, why not? And the people. I remember hearing over the years like references to, that really upset some kids. Some kids were traumatized by seeing their cartoon heroes die. That's like, fuck, come on. I mean, you know what? Yeah, it's upsetting. It's supposed to be. It's dramatic. It's action adventure. They up the consequences. But it's like fuck them. It's like fuck it. Let them be upset. Think of how much worse it would be if somebody real had died. So, many of these kids have pets. One of their pets sooner or later is going to die. And they're getting people making a big deal because, that cartoon space alien robot thing died and it upset the kids. It's like, yeah, I know. That's fucking awesome. It was an awesome scene. And you know what? It had some fucking drama to it. That's how kids' cartoons should be instead of this pacified bullshit that, it's like, no, kids growing up, watching Optimus Prime turn into a truck, drive into a bunch of Decepticons, fight Megatron to the death, and then get killed. That's what a kid's cartoon should fucking well be. And that was fucking awesome. And the thing is, that wasn't even the whole movie. That was like in like the first, wasn't even a quarter of the movie. Yeah, they upped the stakes with that motherfucker, and they did it good. And the soundtrack was awesome, too, from the creepy start where Unicron's coming along and eating fucking planets and destroying sentient life, flying for get spaceships and trying to get away, getting consumed by that big planet-killing thing. I mean, that was creepy. That had some pretty high stakes to it, and that was fucking awesome. And as action adventure stories go, it's a hell of a lot better than most live action movies I've seen before or after. And yeah, that's my thoughts. The Commodore 64 Mini. I started looking up some Commodore 64 games that I haven't tried loading onto it yet. Excuse me, because it'll give you access to the entire Commodore 64 library. And now I have pleasantly I have with it in my mind in the background music in my mind from Turrican, which was ripped off from the Transformers animated movie. which is just fucking awesome. But the system comes with a joystick. You'll need the joystick basically to activate options conveniently at certain times. But you're better off plugging in a USB controller with a D-pad because that'll play way better than those old joysticks will. And actually, they added a few buttons to it in a couple different places. I don't think, man, like two of the buttons were present on the old Commodore joysticks, the common computer joysticks from the time. But sometimes I was using it and I'd accidentally hit a button because you're like holding the joystick and you're holding the knob and you're moving the controller around, and then it's awkward. You could accidentally hit buttons, which reminded me of the Xbox Controller S, which I consider to be one of the shittiest controllers ever made. The original Xbox controller came out nearly perfect, like one of the best dual analog stick controllers ever. And it had the buttons in great positions. It was curved in a way that should fit human hands, whether you're tiny little ones or big hands. Just perfect. And I mean, the D-pad was a little weird, but once you get used to that, it was actually excellent and very smooth feeling D-pad. And it even looked kind of cool with that big Xbox logo on it. But it was, about the size of a Nintendo 64 controller or a Dreamcast controller, which didn't absorb criticism in the past, but Xbox was new and everybody had to find a reason to shit on Xbox because, oh no, it's competing with Sony. Oh no, it's competing with Nintendo. And the one thing that kind of stuck because of all the bullshit they said was kind of true. It's like, it's got a big controller. The controller's too big. It's like, well, it's not too big. It's a big controller. You didn't give a shit when the Nintendo 64 controller was that big. And the Nintendo 64 controller was awkward and uncomfortable as all hell. But I got a free pass. This controller's made to perfection. And, so then Microsoft's like, well, you know what? We'll actually listen to what the customers want, and we'll adjust our methods accordingly. And unfortunately, they stopped making that awesome fucking controller. Best fucking dual analog stick controller. Best controller since the Sega Saturn controller. And it's like they stopped making it and they started making those stupid little controller S things. And like the two of the buttons were moved, so when you press certain button combinations, your hand would brush up against them, and they're so sensitive that would like trigger stuff when you're playing certain games. I think I was pressing both the photon torpedo and phaser buttons, and I think it was Star Trek Shattered Universe. And I remember like the camera angles reversing on me while I was doing that because I think it was either the black or the white button reversed the camera angle. It was something like that. I remember happening repeatedly, and I was like, this controller sucks. The button layout, like as for the four main action buttons, not counting those extra two black and white buttons, it was just a generic, the Super Nintendo kind of started it, the PlayStation made it all present, and then everybody had to rip off the PlayStation. It was like, I despised the Xbox controller S, but I loved the original one. I actually really liked the Xbox 360 controller. That actually was a good controller. Of the controllers that had four buttons as your main action buttons, that was probably the best. They're a little bit closer together, a little bit shaped a little bit different, so that your fingers were closer for really, really rapid moving from one button to the next. But they still had a very distinct positioned feel. So the Xbox 360 controller, even though I don't like the button layout as good as the original Xbox controller, it's overall it's a really great controller. So but I'm not sure if you can plug an Xbox 360 controller into the C64 Mini. Because the Xbox 360 controller, often you have to download special drivers and stuff like that. Now the PlayStation 3 controller, I had actually pretty good luck plugging that into random stuff. You just use the USB charge cord for it and plug it into anything. In fact, I only ever use the damn thing plugged in because I don't like recharging stuff. So I just use it as a plugged in controller. And yeah, I don't like wireless. I don't like dealing with batteries. I just want to plug the motherfucker in and be done with it. And yeah, the C64 Mini, you can plug a bunch of controllers in it if you have one of those special devices for plugging, you plug into the USB port and then it gives you other USB ports. Yeah. I got a pretty cool one that's shaped like a power bar, like an actual that you plug into the wall, except it plugs into the USB port on a computer, and then you can plug other USB devices into it itself. And it has even a spot if it doesn't put out enough power to power all the devices. You can actually plug an additional AC adapter into it, which I haven't tried yet. But you know what? Let's. Uh, Eventually, I plan to get around trying that with the Commodore 64 Mini, and I always really loved the Commodore 64. I look more fondly back at the Commodore 64 than contemporary computer games. Last time I was trying to get my Commodore 64 emulator to work, it wasn't working very well, although I think there's probably new ones that I could download, but I'm just never really that into emulating that stuff. And as little devices go, the Commodore 64 Mini, the empty boxes here, the actual devices. I should have grabbed the actual device instead. It has a keyboard on it, but it's non-functional. And that's because I'm thinking about making a bigger model. From what I've heard from people talking about it online, is the people who made this are thinking about doing a larger model with a bigger keyboard and functional keys, because this thing you have to plug in a USB keyboard to use a keyboard, or use the electronic in the software keyboard. Like you can bring up a keyboard in the software and use that. That said, this keyboard, if they had made this mini console, if they had made the keys on this functional, that would have worked. Like some people said, oh, it's justified that they didn't make this keyboard functional because, it's a small keyboard. It's a mini console. It's supposed to create the look, but, you use other methods to actually function as a keyboard. It's like, when I actually got this, held it in my hands and pressed the non-functional keys, which don't really do anything when you press them. They're just solid. They're just there. When I did that, I was like, well, most people nowadays are pretty damn used to... Where's my cell phone? Pretty damn used to using a cell phone. There's my nearest cell phone. It's open to YouTube. And I'm streaming to YouTube. Well, you know what? This is probably screwing up my resolution a bit. So, yeah. Because my resolution is going to be good or bad based on how much bandwidth I use, because I don't have great connection speed at my place here. But anyway, most people are used to using this stupid little digital keyboard like this. And it's bigger than the keyboard a lot of people would be used to on their cell phones. Bigger than that. Plus, it's a physical keyboard, which gives you some sort of tactile sense of whether or not your finger's actually on the right fucking key. So it's even better. So it's better than what most of us, if they had made it functional, it would have been a bigger, better, more tactile keyboard than what most people are used to using on their cell phone. So they might as well just made the mini console with a functional keyboard. Might as well have done it. Would have been fine. We're all used to smaller crap, it would have worked. It would have worked fine. But no, they didn't do it. They didn't do it. They could have done it. It would have been so awesome. But rumor has it they're planning to make a larger model with a full-size, fully functioning keyboard, built right in, like the Commodore 64 was. So it'll be a contemporary Commodore 64. That would be awesome. A contemporary Commodore 64 that you can just up and plug into your television. Though that's awesome, and I hope they do it. They should. But that said, the mini console, if they wanted to make the keyboard functional, the size of the keyboard should not be a problem. It's not too tiny. They're not big, but those tactile buttons, you press them, you actually feel what you're pressing. And those buttons are big enough that you could press one individually. It would be a more accurate experience than using your cell phone's keyboard. So, I think they should have done that. I think those keys should be functional, because even with my big fat bastard fingers, I can press on it, and I can press those buttons and be like, yeah, I'm not pressing multiple buttons accidentally. This would work. If this keyboard was real, this would work even at this size. So that's my thought on the keyboard. And people justify why the keyboard isn't functional and you have to plug a USB controller into it, or USB keyboard into it, I'm like, they could have made it. They could have made it functional. And if somebody wanted the proper size keyboard, as a lot of people would, still leave the option to plug one into it. You know, why not? That'd be great. I kind of wish it came with more than 2 USB ports, but you know, apparently it works perfectly well. I haven't tried that feature yet. But I've tried a lot of the games on it. Tried a USB controller with a D-pad on it, all that stuff. But I still haven't tried plugging in the device that used multiple USB devices on it. But apparently it works with that. So get your USB. It's not really called a splitter, I don't think, but a hub. Get your USB hub, plug it into it, and plug a bunch of stuff into it, keyboards, controllers, whatever. But it's a great little device. And I just wanted to ramble on about that. Make a little video, stream it online. Probably would have recorded it as something I could edit. But you know what? If I mispronounce something, I ramble on, the wrong word loads, and I say something just not right, you know, screw it. Doesn't matter. Anyway, so yeah, that was, and I just thought, you know, I've once again been watching people talking about the new She-Ra show, so I figured I'd ramble on about that, especially when people are arguing about it. They're arguing about nothing. If you haven't seen it, well, if you haven't seen it, and you think there's a chance you might like it, why not give it a try? The first few episodes, they're a little slow. They feel a little more like a generic cartoon. It gets better, but it doesn't start bad. It actually does a pretty good job of throwing you into that world. And I kind of like that. I kind of like the science fiction-y elements. That they kind of make the world semi-explainable, but kind of mystical at the same time. So like Masters of the Universe, the series that all this spawned from, just like that, they mix their fantasy with science fiction, and they make it kind of science fiction-y, explainable in a Star Trek kind of way, you know? Which is what these shows should be doing. My one disappointment with, was it 2003 or 2002? I forget, it was 2000, that reboot of Masters of the Universe from then, which actually was a really awesome reboot. I don't recommend rebooting stuff, but that was a good reboot. That one from, I think it was 2003, but it might have been 2002. That reboot of Masters of the Universe was actually good. The storytelling was better. There was more consequences, a bit more serious. Skeletor's backstory was made the character. I don't know which backstory is more interesting. Actually, they both were. Originally, he was an assistant of Hordak that got trapped on Eternia, and I actually really like that idea. He actually in the first Masters of the Universe cartoon, which spins off into She-Ra, Skeletor was far more kick-ass than Hordak, though. But in the old comics from back then, the comics that came with the toys, Hordak seemed like a more deadly force and like a third faction that was, you know, a threat to the Skeletor and his evil masters, and of course also a threat to the good guys, He-Man and Castle Grayskull and the Sorceress and Teela and Man-at-Arms and all those guys, you know. Like a third faction, but Hordak seems scarier, nastier than even Skeletor. You know, Skeletor was like a big muscular guy with a floating skull instead of a head, you know? Like his skull was just there in his hood, you know? That's pretty fucking creepy, but Hordak was scarier. Then they came out with the She-Ra cartoon, and Hordak was a useless buffoon. No, really. I mean, he was in charge of this army that was raiding the planet and had the world in devastation. But he was a goofball that threw pies at his own henchmen as a way of punishing them. They really toned down the violence for She-Ra and toned down the threat and the scariness of it to the point where it made it a show. I didn't give a shit about that show. I loved Masters of the Universe. I started watching She-Ra, loved it at the start. Within a very short time, I was like, I don't care about this. This shit might as well be Super Friends. And fuck the Super Friends. Yeah, Batman's awesome. Yeah, Superman's awesome. Yeah, Wonder Woman's awesome, you know. Lovely characters, wonderful characters, but Super Friends fucking sucked, and I knew it as a kid. It was, what little I saw of it was watchable, but I didn't really want to watch it again. It was just lame cartoon drivel. It was weak. And that's what She-Ra became within I don't know how many episodes. It'd be like some great episodes, but it'd be mixed in with like weak crap that did not live up to Masters of the Universe. Sorry, it didn't. The first cartoon show was a bullshit. And, there's somebody walking down the street. Not important. I just happen to know somebody walking by and going past. Nothing important. So the first She-Ra show, I kind of like how they connected Eternia with Etheria. Like that Hordak, had once went to Eternia and got repelled, but he kidnapped, Adora. I guess he sensed she was powerful. That Skeletor was originally one of his minions, but in the end, Skeletor was way more kick-ass than Hordak. And that's fine, It's okay for the student to exceed the teacher. But damn, Hordak was lame. I mean, the laser bubble blaster was like one of his weapons fairly early on. It's like, no, fuck off, Hordak. You're just lame. Go home, Hordak. You're drunk. Fuck you, Hordak. I was like, but in the second Masters of the Universe, series, not really the second series, because the second series was a continuation. That was The New Adventures of He-Man, which was a follow-up to Masters of the Universe, just like She-Ra was a follow-up to Masters of the Universe. Actually, The New Adventures of He-Man was probably, on average, more boring than She-Ra, but also more interesting than She-Ra. And the reason why I can say that kind of contradictory statement is if you watch an individual episode of The New Adventures of He-Man, which was done, I think it was 1989, those individual episodes are kind of boring. Not a lot happens. They're not incredibly bad. It's not quite as lame as Hordak was in the She-Ra cartoons, and the protagonists aren't quite as lame as the witch that flies around on a talking broom and crashes into things, for all of its boringness, the New Adventures of He-Man had something a lot of cartoons could learn from and actually made it a little bit interesting. Every episode was interconnected. Every episode, no matter how big or small the consequences, kind of had an effect on the later episodes. And I appreciate that in a TV show. It's one of the things that made Star Trek Deep Space Nine one of the special Star Treks, one of the great ones, And the next Star Trek to do anything as great as Deep Space Nine would have been Enterprise. Star Trek Enterprise and Star Trek Deep Space Nine, I liked how the little details, everything had consequences. And some people would, in the case of Enterprise, I remember people complaining, well, this episode they said they couldn't fire their phase cannons at warp, and this episode they could. It's like, well, actually, they said they were working on the problem in the previous episode, so shut the fuck up. If you're going to complain about something, at least listen to what you're complaining about. But anyway, no, but Star Trek, like, those are cartoons or live action shows, but Babylon 5 was awesome. Like shows that do that, I really appreciate. The first 2 seasons of Andromeda were awesome. Unfortunately, the last 3 seasons were crap. And 3 is larger than 2, so that means most of the Andromeda TV series is crap. But the first 2 seasons were great. Now, let's see, what do I want? Aloe vera or Pepsi? Yeah, I'll finish off my aloe vera. Or my glass of aloe vera. That's right, I'm drinking aloe vera. I might die by the end of this video due to aloe vera poisoning. But hey, it's Rooster brand aloe vera, so, it's a beverage. It's an actual beverage. There we go. It's not bad. It's good stuff. Tasty, chunky aloe vera. Did I mispronounce aloe vera? I don't know. I don't care. So, like, the Masters of the Universe mythos, you can reboot it in good ways. I would prefer somebody look at one of the previous series and find a way to expand upon that, because I don't like reboots. Just rebooting something to me starts off as a bad idea. That said, this new She-Ra series, as reboots go, it's not bad. So far, not thinking it's better than the Masters of the Universe reboot of the early 2000s. I think it was either 2002 or 2003. I'm not sure which. One or the other. Maybe 2002, because I think Ninja Turtles was 2003 for the reboots. Because they were around the same time, but I don't think they were the same year. Just close years. Anyway, yeah. So one of the things that I liked about Master Universe was the mixing of science fiction and fantasy, and this new She-Ra show kind of has that. It starts off. It feels more like a kid-friendly cartoon when it starts off, though. Like you see the bad guys training. They're the evil horde, and they don't call themselves the evil horde, but they are the horde, which to them they're a somewhat militant organization. So yeah, horde kind of sounds bad, but you know what? When you look right down to it, most terms that mean military-related things should have a similar tone to people. It's just the way it is. And they look like, they're just like... it has a tone of being fairly normal. Like, these people signed up for this because they're kind of the best at what they can do, even if the best at what they're doing is just kind of... I don't know, some sort of military training exercise, running, jumping, avoiding getting shot, I don't know how to describe it. It's kind of weird fantasy science fiction stuff, too. But, it starts off with that, It's a surprisingly laid-back environment for the evil dominating force that's ruling the planet. But apparently these young individuals are being trained to be the next, people to follow the rule of the foot. And some evil bitch named Shadow Weaver, who, that was a character in the previous She-Ra show, is kind of overseeing this for Hordak. And Shadow Weaver plays a more distinct role than Hordak does in the show. Which, considering the last She-Ra cartoon, which was the first She-Ra cartoon, this is an improvement for Hordak. This is Hordak. He's not like this scary, mysterious threat that we barely see anything of the 20 Zeros Masters of the Universe reboot. But this is a hell of a lot better than the buffoon who hears something displeasing from his henchman, pulls a slapstick-style trapdoor lever, opens a trapdoor under them, and they go falling down and splash into some water, I guess. I don't know. And then he laughs over fucking with his henchmen, It was like too cartoonish slapstick bullshit from the first Hordak. It was a very disgusting show for that. That's one of the things I really despised about that cartoon when I was a kid. It's like, this is what has become of Masters of the Universe? This is the Masters of the Universe spin-off they're giving us? It's like, fuck that shit. Now, this time, Hordak, he's not really an over-top villain because your interaction with him, he's like the leader figure that you don't see interact with the people that much, or at least the people under him. He tells Shadow Weaver what to do, and what he tells her is stuff that's common sense, but Shadow Weaver has her own ambitions, which aren't really against him specifically, but she doesn't follow his orders either. She basically has been raising Adora, who she somehow found as an orphaned baby, which is their hint to She-Ra's origin of the previous series of being abducted by Hordak. And this time it's Shadow Weaver that raised her. And she's basically been raised to believe like the propaganda that the Horde have been putting out to the people. That the Horde are good. That they're, aliens who have come to this planet. But there are individuals out there that become known as princesses because they get these special powers. And they're a threat because they're out of control. And they don't have the proper training to deal with those powers. And you need the Horde to take control of things and keep everybody safe, is their propaganda. Which, it's perhaps not the hardest thing to see through. But that said, the way it's portrayed, I don't find it that bad. And most evil organizations have propaganda. And Adora, despite being incredibly skilled, seems to be raised sheltered from that. And I find that interesting. In the previous series, I think they used full-blown brainwashing, and in this one, only after she rebels is it threatened to be used on her. And the dynamic between her and Catra actually is legitimately interesting. Now, the internet freaked the fuck out over some people like, oh, it's so wonderful. They're going to have a same-sex relationship between She-Ra and Catra. There's like sexual tension, and there's even this episode where they dance, and you're gonna be on Team She-Ra and Catra. You know, it's so progressive. It's not. There's so very little there. And actually, the whole She-Ra Catra thing is kind of played up like they're long childhood friends that are so close. It's more like family that it would almost seem incestuous for them to have like. They could possibly have like some sort of sexual attraction to each other, but no, it's not that. And then there's other people like, they're sexualizing a children's cartoon. It's so fucking horrible. It's like, well, there's been romance in children's cartoons like forever, and you know, it's just because somebody's attracted to somebody doesn't mean it's sexualized. I mean, they've had like attraction and romance in cartoons like for fucking ever. You know, it's like it's no big fucking deal. They're not necessarily sexualizing anything just because it's a less commonly shown sexual relationship, but no, it's like, no, they're not. No, the closest thing to the two things I found that were the closest things to anything sexual was, I think, in the first episode, because Catra's kind of like a cat. There's one scene where she's like, it looked like she was like curled up on the foot of Adora's bed. She wasn't in bed with Adora, but she was sleeping on the foot of the bed, you know, kind of like a cat or a dog would. You know, like somebody's pets that they'd have. You know, sleep on the foot of the bed there, Rover. You know, it's like, you know, that's what she did, you know. So they were in the same bed. Oh, that's so controversial. No, it's not. And then there's like the episode where they're at the prom. Like, people made a big deal out of, they called it Princess Prom or some stupid fucking thing like that, which wasn't a bad episode. And it's like, Adora was following Catra, and she was basically pursuing her because they were trying to keep an eye on the bad guys. This was neutral territory, and she kept warning people and getting in trouble for warning them that Catra and her assistant is going to fuck things up. And while Catra has, because she was there with Scorpia, is that how you pronounce the character's name? But actually fairly interesting characters in a less than menacing kind of way. Anyway, the personalities aren't that threatening. Like, the bad guys are even kind of friendly. Which kind of makes it a little weak, but kind of interesting at the same time, you know. But no, they're at that Princess Prom thing, and one happens to be pursuing the other when the dance starts up, so there's a second that they're dancing, you know. And, but then Adora turns and talks to somebody else and is dancing with them, and turns to talk to somebody else, and then turns back to Catra and is dancing with her because she's trying to keep her eyes on Catra. And it's actually kind of hostile, which some people might view as romantic because there's a lot of fucked up people out there that, you know, but it actually has a very hostile tone to it. And then Catra smiles and, you know, tells Adora, you know, as they're dancing, you know, it's like, I got what I wanted. And then explosions go off. I had you distracted, motherfucker. You know, and Catra did what She-Ra said she was going to do. Catra and her ally fucked things up. But Catra did it knowing that She-Ra, or Adora, you know, same person, was going to pursue her, keep her eyes on her, and the other person was more likely to slip away. And Catra fucked with her the whole time by, you know, keeping her distracted, following her. And the other person, you know, bombed the place, you know, the explosions went off, things start falling apart, you know. Catra got the job done, but, you know, she did it by distracting She-Ra, and it wasn't romantic. And they said that there's one point where one of them saves the other, you know, because they're longtime childhood friends, and it's like, but she didn't grab her hand, she put her arm around her, and it's like, oh my god, it's like, you're making a big deal out of that. It's like, if they're trying to make that out to be some sort of, romantic thing because she rescued a person by putting their arm around her, that's weak. That's weak. If that's their way of hinting at some sort of sexual relationship between the two characters or sexual attraction, then I would say that they've done so much to minimize it, then it would borderline on homophobic. So it's like, no, it's like that's no big fucking deal, But the internet freaked out. Like, people are like, it's so great, it's so progressive. It's like, no, it's a standard cartoon. It's not that big of a deal. There's differences, that do make it a bit more progressive, but it's not that much, And I'm not complaining about the progressiveness of it. It's like, yeah, I think this shit should be more progressive anyway. I don't care. I don't think it needs to be more or less progressive. It's just what is what it is. But there's nothing controversial about it. Like, there's a few things where their philosophical attitudes about certain things are kind of shown, and you can kind of tell that it's a more progressive culture than the one we live in now. But technically, Masters of the Universe, I mean, sure, it was a bunch of fighting barbarians, but there was like hints of it once having been an advanced culture that may have at some point fallen apart through war or some crazy event, and most of the characters were philosophically extraordinarily progressive on everything from animal rights to just how you treat others and treat criminals. The civilization of the previous Masters of the Universe series was incredibly progressive. So even if society had degenerated into fighting barbarians, they still had remnants of, advanced culture. They were a very progressive society compared to the world on Earth, It was like, and the same goes for this show. There's nothing really about it that stands out as a big deal. If somebody's looking to use this show as a big progressive movement, it's not that special. It didn't really do that much. Most of the the biggest relationship drama that might have anything to do with sexual attraction is when Bo goes to the dance with a woman who asked him instead of the girl that he was friends with for years and years and years and years and years, who expected him to go with her, but she didn't ask him. It wasn't established, and it was like, that's the biggest thing that was clearly stated to be a relationship thing. There's one character, the pirate guy, who's over the top and silly. He acts like he's super attracted to one of the women there, and she seems to find it annoying and barely tolerates him. She does seem to be somewhat friends with him. He seems to be like an over-the-top gay stereotype, so maybe they're trying to say that he's closeted and trying to compensate for it, in which case, I guess they're not that progressive if he feels the need to compensate and make it look like he's not gay. I don't know. But or it could just be that he has no desire to look stereotypically macho, and as a result, that's just the way he is, over the top, flamboyant, and he might actually be attracted to her. I don't know. They haven't really established that. The character Bo in the original She-Ra series, he was basically a cartoon version of Prince Precious from Flesh Gordon. Like, he looked like he belonged in a gay pride parade, which there's nothing wrong with. It's probably one of the reasons why he's the only one of the few characters that I can stand out in memory as noticeable, because none of the characters in She-Ra, other than She-Ra herself in the previous series, were really all that memorable. They just kind of became a blur. Yeah, there's that guy that kind of looks like, I don't know, he's not quite a popple, but he's not quite a something else. He's kind of colorful, and he hides in the background of every other episode. Yeah, there was that character in She-Ra. Kind of remember him. Like, some of the bad guys were, like, kind of cool toys, but, I kind of remember them. There was Hordak, who was supposed to be threatening and menacing, but then he just throws some fucking pies and ruins that. Like, the characters in this seem more distinct, memorable, and interesting. And I kind of thought that if this thing was supposed to be like this progressive, inclusive thing with more representative is I figured they would have made Bo a lot like he used to be, but make him even more of a gay stereotype, but maybe open about it. But no, they actually made him seem... They actually totally changed the character of Bo, but they did make him more interesting. He's like a guy who just says what's on his mind, and he's got like this... an entirely different level of self-awareness, which is kind of amusing in a way. It's like he says what comes into his mind. He's happy, optimistic, and excitable, and it's the sort of thing that could be annoying, but they wrote it in the character in a way that's not really that annoying. So it's actually a likable character. Yeah, it's kind of like... I was kind of like surprised that they changed the character the way they did, but they also were trying to make the characters younger and more diverse. So there's that. But it works. It was a perfectly fine character, and I don't really feel like they changed things all that badly. Maybe as he gets older, maybe he'll grow a mustache like the other version of Bo. I don't know. But yeah, I'm not sure what to say about most of that other than, the characters. The characters are just fine. There's the way they use the characters seem pretty good. And the idea of like getting like the idea that there's some in your face progressive message there. It's like, no. And actually, if people are going on that they're like ruining this by changing things up for a new audience, to make something that wasn't meant to be progressive or sexualized, like if somebody's like drawing that from this, one of the things is even the people from Filmations admitted that both Masters of the Universe and the spin-off they were involved with, She-Ra, Princess of Power, both of those shows, they deliberately made as gay as possible. So it's like the original series was as gay as they could get away with. So it's like, why are people complaining about the new one? What would you expect? And I'm not even sure it lives up to the original in that category. And you know what? That's enough aloe vera drink for now. Stick this bastard back in the fridge. Finish off what's in my glass. Yep. So, but the question, but the thing is, would I say it would win somebody over? It's hard to say. Personally, I feel this show is better than the original She-Ra cartoon and better than the New Adventures of He-Man, which was the He-Man series from, I think it was 1989, though it might have actually been 1990, but I'm pretty sure it was 1989. I'm pretty sure it was the very end of the 1980s. So I suppose it could have been 1988, but I think it was 1989. Alright, so I think this new show is better than both of those. The two Masters of the Universe spin-off shows from the 1980s. I think it's better than those. But I would say the original Masters of the Universe, as well as the early 20-Zeros reboot, both are better. Which is not an insult. In fact, that's pretty middle of the road. I mean, the two shows were weak, were weaker than it. The two shows that were great were greater than it. Middle ground, Masters of the Universe, multiverse category. Middle ground. Now, do I think the show is actually good on its own, not just comparing it to the shows that came before? Yeah, I'm just taking a moment to make sure my sinuses don't swell shut. And if you listen this far, well, wow, that'd be impressive. But no, compare it to the past ones. I just did that. Basically, I can think of two Masters Universe shows that were better and two spin-offs that were less. Yeah. Yeah, I do think it's good on its own. I think if this cartoon doesn't look interesting to you, you're not going to like it. Some people didn't like the animation style. excuse me. Some people commented that they liked the quality of the animation. Some people complained about the quality of the animation in this one. There are some inconsistencies, like She-Ra can look way taller in one scene than in another scene. You know, they kind of mix that up a little bit. They're not very consistent about it. There's one line that actually referenced her becoming 8 feet tall when she turns into She-Ra, because she does get bigger. Kind of like in the 2003 reboot series for Masters of the Universe, where Prince Adam actually takes on a whole different form when he becomes He-Man. Well, in the old 80s cartoon, he looks pretty much the same, except when he turns into He-Man, his pink and purple clothes disappear and are replaced by He-Man's big blue power bra, and all of a sudden he gets a spray tan. Like, He-Man's more tanned than Prince Adam. So that lightning bolt from Grayskull coming down gives him a tan. Now you know what it does, what it gives him the power. One of his powers is he's tanned. It's a power tan. And he also gets the power bra. And he gets the fuzzy shorts. Well, I think Prince Adam actually was wearing fuzzy shorts over his tights anyway, wasn't he? Except it was a fuzzy purple. I don't remember. Fuck it. I gotta watch the cartoon again to figure that one out. Oh, Masters of the Universe with your fuzzy purple shorts. But anyway, yeah. So originally, He-Man's proportions going from Prince Adam to He-Man didn't really change. Prince Adam was pretty muscular to begin with. In the reboot series, now my sinus is all squeeze my nose. Trying to get the sinuses to clear out. They're kind of like they're swelling shut. I breathed in something I'm allergic to, apparently. Anyway, the Masters of the Universe show. I mean, it was like physical changes done to Prince Adam when he turned into He-Man, other than the spray tan and the change of clothes in the 2003, maybe 2002 reboot. I forget the exact year. This show, yeah, there's physical changes to She-Ra. It's almost like a Sailor Moon style transformation, though with Sailor Moon it's largely clothing being changed. And I actually like the Sailor Moon inspired variation of the transformation scene. That said, the old transformation scenes that Filmation did, I loved those. Those were awesome. Those were excellent. The new one's good. The old ones were awesome. You know, the new one's still good, but anyway. Dora gets taller. And there's one point where somebody references her as 8 feet tall. I think they were being metaphoric. I don't think anybody actually measured her, but maybe she is 8 feet tall. I haven't looked that up, but I think they're just grabbing a number out of their head because she's extra tall. I think they're being metaphoric, Like, that weighs a ton. Well, no, actually it's only a quarter of a ton. It's like, yeah, well, I just carried it, so fuck you. That sort of attitude, That's like, somebody's like taller, the person might just be, 6.5 feet tall, and somebody goes, man, that 9-foot bastard, he bumped his head on the door again, the reference to her being 8 feet tall could have been a metaphor, but she does look inconsistently tall. Some people have pointed that out. I've seen that as a reference, and, that's a legitimate complaint. You also might not like the animation style. Personally, I don't dislike it. It's perfectly fine. The 80s cartoons, that was when animation got really good. Like, animation kept perfecting itself, and the 80s cartoons weren't perfect. There were errors. But the thing is, when the 80s cartoons didn't look good, that's because it was an error. They were actually able to get the humans proportioned, like they looked like people. They weren't just like stretch and squash cartoons, like those 80s action cartoons. They did a good job of that, of having a level of realism. The lines that they were drawn with weren't always too thick. They could like get a level of detail and realism, but still had that bright, colorful cartoonishness. Like an old cartoon like Masters of the Universe, it wasn't perfect, but it's light years beyond like a lot of the stuff that they had 2 decades later. The real Ghostbusters would be another excellent example of a show with excellent animation. Yeah, there were errors where something would be the wrong color or something wouldn't look as good, and you could tell when the animation team that was animating the episode was either the A team, the B team, or the C team, because you'd see reoccurring levels of visual quality, especially in a syndicated season that had a whole bunch of episodes. You could see different levels of quality, but at least it was like a lower quality version of something that was good. And when it was good, it was like, it looked amazing. It was great. The level of detail was just excellent. Thundercats, if you look at the original Thundercats cartoon, bright, vibrant, colorful, beautiful, and at the same time, the proportions and details had a realism to it that was like animation, just greatness. That was just the way things should be. The old Transformers cartoons, Gem and the Holograms, the previous She-Ra cartoon, Masters of the Universe, all that stuff. You had great looking cartoons that were proportioned in a way that was great. And, is there hints of that in this? Kinda, but they moved away from that. So I would have preferred that old 80s style. The late 90s, you get stuff like, Dexter's Laboratory was great in its own way, but they deliberately made it look like animation from the 50s. So it was stylized, which is good because it was true to the series they were trying to create. That said, if you want to actually take that style of animation, like from Flintstones in the 50s or Dexter's Laboratory, that's just deliberately cartoony, deliberately crude drawings, and it's like, no, side by side, that doesn't hold up to what they were doing in the 80s. It doesn't even hold up to what Filmation was doing in the 70s with Star Trek. Because that was a pretty good-looking cartoon. The characters are kind of stiff and non-detailed, but, you get to see William Shatner animated. Speaking of William Shatner animated, there was actually a Batman cartoon where he played Harvey Dent that was... It was all done like 1960s Batman style, which is normally a Batman style. I'd be like, why bother watching it? But it was actually pretty decent. It was, that was pretty cool. And plus the fact that they drew William Shatner's character actually looked like a bit like Captain Kirk did back in the 60s. Like they drew William Shatner looking like William fucking Shatner. It's like, that was like, it was like made to be nostalgic anyway, that was when Adam West was still alive. They had Adam West doing the voice of Batman and all that. That was actually a pretty good cartoon. I forget what it was called, but it involved Two-Face. And despite being silly, and I usually prefer Batman to be serious, I prefer the more serious versions of Batman. Despite being a silly version of Batman, that one was actually pretty good. But speaking of William Shatner animated, but no, like the animation style, but the animation style, thankfully, isn't that. We're not looking at Dexter's Laboratory or the new Thundercats Roar. We're not looking at something crummy like that. Where it's its own thing. It kind of looks like, I think the show was called Totally Spies. I never really watched it, but I saw it on. There was a couple other shows kind of like that, where I think they were animated in Europe, or they might have been animated here in Canada. I'm not sure. They could have been animated in the United States. But the old 20 Zeros Teen Titans show, that would be another example where where you have like traditional North American animation and kind of like anime, the traditional Japanese animated look of stuff like Sailor Moon, and then you kind of mix the two and it's in between, and often I find it doesn't look as good as one or the other. But with the old Teen Titans series, I actually really liked how it looked. And I really liked how Sailor Moon looked. In fact, a lot of anime, I really liked that style. But sometimes, like I think of that show I kept seeing on every now and then, but I never really watched it or never paid attention to it, would be Totally Spies. But I think a few other shows did animation in that style, where it's like a cross between traditional, like North American animation and traditional anime, like it kind of merges the two, and it's good, just doesn't come off as good as either, I found. This is kind of like that. It's very colorful, very bright, vibrant. I like that about it. And the animation style may or may not be for somebody. So as far as I'm concerned, all complaints about the animation style are legitimate. But all compliments about the animation style, as far as I'm concerned, are legitimate too. because I don't know, the animation lines are not drawn too thick. It's not drawn crappy. There is a fair bit of detail. There's a lot of color to it. It's fairly vibrant. There's definitely a lot about the visual look of the show to appreciate. But at the same time, yeah, it's not going to be for everybody. And every now and then they did make mistakes. Like, it's like, how tall is She-Ra? Is she... Sometimes she looks like she's not really much taller than Adora was before she transformed. Other times she's a towering giant. You know, like... Maybe it's her superpowers are just inconsistent. So the animation style, like, I can't criticize anybody for complaining about that. That's personal taste. And I could see how... either complaints or compliments on that subject could go either way. That said, on the social issues, it's like, if somebody thinks it's way too sexualized, it's like, no, there's not that much in there. It's just another cartoon. And if somebody thinks it's like this great progressive message that finally has some same-sex relationships in it, it's like, it's hardly... If you look for it, you can find hints of like stuff from various characters, but it's very, very subtle. I mean, you've already seen more than that in other places. It's like nothing to get excited about, whether you're for or against it. And I see no reasonable reason to be against it. It's like, you know, it's like, why? But anyway, whether you're for or against it, there's like so little in there. It's like it's nothing to argue about. It's like it's a big argument about nothing. This show's just woke garbage. They're sexualizing it to have same-gender relationships, to force same-gender relationships into the story and blah 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 whatever. It's like, no, they're not. And it's like, these other people are like, it's such a great progressive message. You'll see this and you'll finally see representation. And it's like, no, it's not. It doesn't really do much to represent anything. It's a whole lot of arguing over nothing. There's arguing over lots of stuff. For example, most of the new Star Wars movies, except for Rogue One, kind of sucked. Episode 7, Episode 8. I haven't seen Solo, so I can't really confirm my opinions on that, but most people didn't like it, and as far as I can tell, I think I'll probably agree with them. You know, the new Star Wars movies mostly sucked. And then people are like, well, those movies had diverse characters and blah, 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 whatever. You're just a misogynist. You're just a sexist. You're just a racist. It's like, no, they're just bad movies. Then they tried to say the same thing about Star Trek. Oh, you don't like Michael Brenham, or is that how you pronounce your name, Brenham? Michael Barenham? I don't fucking know. I'm horrible with names. Anyway, you just don't like Mikey Sue because she's a woman and she's not white and you're just a sexist and a racist and you don't want diversity in Star Trek. And it's like, it was full of shit when they claimed Ghostbusters fans who were disappointed with Ghostbusters being rebooted were just misogynists. You know, that was bullshit to try to say that. And it was bullshit when they tried to say it about Star Wars fans. It's outright laughable when they insult Star Trek fans for not liking diversity. One of the main themes of Star Trek was diversity. And it's like, now you just want Star Trek to be the way it used to be. You don't want diversity in it. Like Star Trek, one of the main themes of Star Trek was diversity. How fucking stupid is that? Like there's the social justice warrior mentality where they want to attack people for having complaints about media. They want to find a boogeyman to fight in so many places where they're just creating enemies is absurd. But fighting over She-Ra, either to say it's like some great stride for what the social justice warriors want, or to say that it's like some sort of great affront to what the anti-social justice warriors want, it's like, no, you're fighting over nothing. You're fighting over nothing. You're fighting You're fighting over the content of gold and silver found within an empty tin can. You know, it's like you're fighting over nothing. You're fighting over nothing. It's there's nothing there to fight over. It's just a cartoon. Is it amazing? Do I think it'll win people over? I think people could watch it and like it. If it doesn't look or sound like something somebody would like, then I do legitimately think they probably wouldn't like it. It's not so amazing. I think it's going to win over every single person that sees it, or even the majority. But if it looks like something you might like, you probably will. It's not that bad. In fact, I don't even think it's bad. I think it's... I would say it's better than okay. It's mildly good. It's not amazing. My official response to the series and its level of quality and how interesting it is if they make a season 2, I would deliberately watch it. One of the reasons I checked it out because I was curious about the big deal people on the internet were making about the show. And I discovered there was nothing. They were fighting over nothing. 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 It's a completely imaginary fight. I mean, they're really arguing, but what they're fighting over, it might as well be their invisible friend that they think exists. They're fighting over fucking nothing. It's nothing. It's fucking nothing. But that said, I'm actually glad I checked this show out. Not just because I was curious, not just to see how crazy some people on the internet can get, but I actually enjoyed watching it. The character of Adora, mildly interesting, not amazing. The two friends she makes that cause her to decide to defect from the Horde and fight on the side of the rebellion. They're characters that are enjoyable enough. You'd think, if I knew people like that in real life, I'd want to hang out with them. They're pretty friendly. Taking the She-Ra character, moving her from being a young adult down to being a teenager, changes the dynamic a little bit. Not saying it's a better idea, not saying it's a worse idea. It just changes things a little bit. I'm just fine with that. I'm fine with the different tone. The character of Catra. She's betrayed because her friend turned over to the other side. And her friend is like saying, well, these people are evil. And she goes, of course they're the bad guys. But they're our guys, Catra won't turn over good guys. And Catra feels betrayed that Adora moved over to the good guys. And they were close friends, and that can cause hostility. When you feel betrayed by a friend, if a friend betrays you, whether the reasons are legitimate or not, that's generally something that pisses people off. Betrayal is not something good. Now, I think Adora's reasons are justified, so I don't blame her. I wouldn't blame her if this was a real story. I mean, they're just fictional characters we're concerning ourselves with, but the whole point in fictional characters is to have an interesting story. And likable characters, and a crow flew past. There's a crow by the puddle. The puddle's frozen over. Aw, crow can't get any water out of the puddle. Or is it cracked? I don't know. Is it cracked in the puddle? The crow got some water from the puddle. I'm being distracted. Why not? Been talking about She-Ra for how long here? Now, it's over 78 minutes. 78 minutes and so many seconds. That also includes rambling on about the Commodore 64 Mini. Yeah. But in conclusion, you're just the people fighting on the internet over She-Ra. They're fighting over nothing. If you want to debate whether or not it's a good show, whether the characters are well written or not, there's like some limits to the writing. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's not bad. Interesting storytelling. I kind of like the mythos behind the world as it's portrayed. the character of Madame Raz, when they introduced her, I was like, oh no, that was such an annoying, silly character in the original show. And the fact that it just kind of make her a somewhat senile, a little bit crazy woman living in the woods who talks to her non-animate broom. This time the broom's not a magical character come up to life, I thought that was actually kind of amusing. Excuse me. Aloe vera burp. Or maybe it was Pepsi. Pepsi was the last thing I drank. It's a combination. Pepsi and aloe vera beverage. Rooster brand aloe vera beverage. Because why not? And PepsiCo brand Diet Pepsi. Yeah. PepsiCo brand. Pepsi Cola brand Diet Pepsi. PepsiCo. The Pepsi Corporation. Yeah. Yeah, I should mix it should mix some Diet Pepsi and some Diet Coke and then just drink it, and it's like, yeah, it's all the same. Actually, it's not the same, but close enough. I wonder if that would make for a good beverage. I mean, Diet Pepsi's good. Diet Coke's good. Would the mix be good? Probably. It's not like the universe is going to explode. That'd be funny if it did. Yeah, so in conclusion, they're fighting over nothing, blah, blah, blah. Fine series. Yeah, Catra is actually an interesting character in this. You can kind of see why she's so attached to Adora. Adora having stuck up for her when she basically dealt with abuse from other people living in their little horde society, and especially from Shadow Weaver. And Adora protected her from a lot of abuse and protected her over the years, and that's revealed in flashbacks, as if not alluded to previously, that the two had a long friendship, and which explains why at times Catra would be on the fence as to what to do about Adora. And Shadow Weaver kind of, while being horrifically abusive, kind of used Adora as a bit of a daughter character, and was very abusive to what she viewed as an unworthy friend of Catra. So it's actually interesting when you actually see Catra fight against Shadow Weaver. It's actually a fight that's probably the most emotionally rewarding fight in the series, is when one of the bad guys fights one of the other bad guys, because Shadow Weaver's an abusive bitch, and it's like very abusive to Catra. And it's like, fuck yeah, Catra, kick her fucking ass, It's like, that was good. Hordak is a bad guy in this. Thankfully, he's not the goofy guy from the old She-Ra cartoon, but he's also not as scary of a threat as you had in, like, a lot of the other Masters of the Universe material. But I find him kind of interesting, as he actually seems like a competent leader, which could be boring, could be a disappointment that he's not like this almost mystical threat. But I like this idea. Perhaps it's overcompensating for how stupid he was in the first She-Ra cartoon, but I like him. He seems like a competent leader. He calls out Shadow Weaver repeatedly for Shadow Weaver's obsession over Adora and just plain not getting the job done. He calls out Shadow Weaver for, if there's a problem with Catra, then it's Shadow Weaver's fuck up for not training her better, And in the end, when he realizes Catra's potentially getting results, and Shadow Weaver is just obsessing over Adora, and, pissed that she's, has to use Catra as the new Adora, he, outright said, Catra gets results, he sides with Catra. He spies on them, discovers that Catra is kind of rebelling, but she's just rebelling against Shadow Weaver, and what Catra's doing is going to get results, and he's like, yeah, Team Catra. Go with Catra. It's like, fuck Shadow Weaver, she's a hindrance. And, that was kind of like a cool moment in the plot points. They introduced, is she called Scorpia or something like that? I forget the Scorpion character. Who actually seems like a pleasant, supportive, lumbering, slightly slow-minded bad guy, but kind of likable at the same time. Yeah. Makes for a good ally of Catra's, even though it looks like Catra is on the fence as to whether or not she's going to respect or just use the Scorpia character. Yeah, because nobody said Catra's perfect. But that said, Catra totally deserves to kick Shadow Weaver's ass. That was like actually building up to like the battle to that episode where she actually fights Shadow Weaver. It's like, yeah, kick that fucking bitch's ass. That was a good moment in the series. The character Intrapia. I think in the original series, because it's so hard for me to remember all the details, I think Intrapia was originally right from the start a bad guy. Oh, looks like the kitchen's going to be needed soon. And that's where I set up my camera. So I'm going to end this with saying that Intrapia is an interesting character on how she changes sides, because she's kind of like neutral. She's good-natured, she's positive, she's friendly, but she doesn't really care in the difference between the good guys and the bad guys. Due to accident, she feels betrayed by the good guys, or you can see that she feels sad about what she thinks is being betrayed, but, And I'm going to end this for now because this is over 85 minutes long. And let's see. Hey, it came up on the first press. I'm going to stop streaming, yes. And soon the television will be turned on and the stove will be used and all sorts of activities going to be going on here. So I'm going to stop streaming and let's see.